Hello there, 2D character animation students. Emily here with my cat puppet and actual cat that you can see on the back of my chair here. I've got my teaching assistant today. I wanted to keep talking about the Breaking Chad project and just how you can go about editing your puppet files in Illustrator or Photoshop to get different effects within Character Animator, and just different options for exporting and things to try, including lip sync, which we've talked about but haven't really explored recording or translating from an audio file before. So I have my Cat Chad file here. I'm actually going to upload this puppet to Blackboard. I don't think I have yet, but this was just that Chad puppet from a previous class that I modified and just changed the face shape. If you want to redraw things, you can. I will say that as nice as it is to have this Chad puppet, the way that they drew things is a little bit different than I would with like the mouth. It's not just a stroke, it's like compound pads. So editing that kind of thing could be a little more challenging, like when I added fangs last week. So I don't have tons of mouth variation here, but like I said, the Cat Chad or Chad puppet is really just to give you a starting point. You could use the blank template from the previous week. Those are good files to save and just have for when you do start your projects from scratch. You don't always have to start from a template. Obviously, this is just a way to get introduced to the workflow and all the different things that we can do within Character Animator, or at least some of the things. It's an increasingly more powerful program. But two of the things that really make it unique are this performance capture of watching the face and translating it to similar features on the puppet, and then the lip syncing I really think is the most impressive thing. Off camera I was just talking about the new beta for Character Animator, which I posted a link for on Blackboard. You can download that and try it out, but it has a new feature that translates from a transcript as well, from captions, so it makes the lip sync that much more accurate than trying to hear what we're saying and then swap out those phonemes with the related visemes or visual versions of those syllables, basically. So I brought in this Cat Chad puppet, and there's really not anything too different here, but I wanted to talk about something with our handles. Handles are a way that you can add physics or dangle properties to a puppet, but then also add draggable features. So with this puppet, there's these little dangle bits on the end of the fur. You could really see it on the top of the head here. And really the only thing you have to do for that is you have your puppet file. You bring it into Character Animator. And then in Character Animator, spoiler alert, we add a body to this guy later. I know that's crazy, but we don't just work with talking heads in this class. We will get into torsos and beyond in the upcoming weeks. This is a puppet that I already had modified, so if you import this puppet file, he'll also have these points. And the handles are just a way to determine the properties of part of a layer. Normally, if you want something to move, it has to be its own layer. But when you use these different points, you have a lot of control that you wouldn't otherwise. If you've used After Effects' Puppet tool, it's the exact same thing. In fact, I feel like this is a descendant of that Puppet tool. And I'll be talking more about After Effects next week. I wanted to focus on the Breaking Chad project. I realize we've spent a lot of time in Character Animator so far, but we're going to be going over animation techniques in these other programs as well. So you can see I have these points here, and they're assigned as fixed or dangle. There's quite a few different modifiers that you can do. And in the rig mode in Character Animator, you really can't edit the artwork at all. That's what we're doing in Photoshop and Illustrator. Remember, if you open a file and don't have the original puppet file up, you just need to right-click on the puppet icon in the project window, and then you can say Edit Original. And then that will open it up in Illustrator and you can go about making your changes. So these individual layers are what's imported into Character Animator. And we've already talked about the importance of the layer hierarchy, not just for organization, but for the puppet animation itself. It's looking for, the software is looking for these specific layer names. And then it's also looking for what has a plus sign next to it, because that means that layer is being controlled by something within Character Animator, specifically the camera. But anything with the plus sign is an independent layer that's going to be moving without you having to drag it around, basically. So the pupil is independent, the eyebrows are independent, the mouth is independent itself. So, and then the puppet itself is independent. You can see there's one just next to the overall top layer as well. So we can edit this, and then when we make those changes, that's what we see within Character Animator. But within Character Animator, we really can't edit the assets at all, aside from the rigging. So if I have something I want to animate beyond just an independent layer, that's what I have these draggers for. And there's not tons of tools within Character Animator. It's more about properties and things that we're changing while animating. But in the rig mode, there is a few tools right underneath our character here. We have just the default, which is a selection tool, so that we can determine what's selected and shifted around. Otherwise, we just have a hand tool for moving within the scene. We can zoom in, and then everything to the right of zooming in is a variation of just the handle tool. The handle itself just allows us to place a point on a layer, and it's kind of like a keyframe. You need to have two of them in order to do anything. But then you can also have a stick, which is basically just a long handle. And then these are just three properties that the dragger can have. So these are just shortcuts, but you can pin it so that it's fixed or doesn't move. You can make it draggable so that you can do that by hand with your mouse. Or you can make it dangle so it's actually being affected by gravity and the movement of the puppet. So you can see with the cat's fur, I have it fixed near the head, and then I have it dangle at the end. And if the fixed wasn't there, that would just mean that this area would also kind of be dangling. You get a better idea of this to the far left of the tools. There's this little icon here where you can switch to your mesh instead of just the outside of it. And if you look at your mesh or wireframe, you can get an idea of where things might change. So when you have a point, it's actually creating more of a mesh there that you can get more finessed movement. If I deleted, let me deselect, if I deleted that fixed point, you could see there's less of a mesh there. There's less definition. And maybe it won't be obvious, but now when I record, that will probably dangle a little too much. Usually the dangle is just affected by movement, but if you twirled on your physics property, you can play with the gravity strength, and then you could really see anything set to dangle is going to start dragging down. But do you see how that one I removed the fixed point of is more distorted than these other ones? That's because there's nothing to kind of protect it. That mesh just continues in. Now, I'm showing you something that's already completed, hypothetically. Let's go to our Chadusa, which was my homework. Since I created Cat Chad in a previous semester, I wanted to make a new one. And I plan on doing further iterations with this, but I made the Chad puppet green. I had started with that vampire one last week and kind of recycled that since he was already fanged and had pointy ears. You can see some things I want to change already, like the nose. But I just have the Illustrator file handy. I really can't do much with that here, so I would just right-click on the puppet in the project window. I would say Edit Original. I just happen to have it up already here. But then I'd be able to go in and modify something like moving that nostril over a few clicks, or doing something like changing the color, etc. I did add a bunch of snakes, obviously, to this, and I made those with the blob brush, which is something I talked about with shape creation last week. The blob brush is cool because it paints a fill and a stroke. That just looks like a fill right now, but if I sampled something with both, you could see it adds a fill and stroke. This would be kind of difficult to draw with the pen tool just to get those curves. And then I could always go in with the pen tool or direct select to modify that. So I just made a little dorky snake and added an eye to it. I plan on adding a more luxurious head of hair, bed of hair. I think that's what you say for snakes. But if I wanted to change something here, like we did in the previous class, let's say I want yellow eyes instead, I could just shift click those and choose a different color. And then when I save that, it's going to update in the character animator file. And even if I had animation recorded, it would update there as well, which is really awesome part of this workflow. So I have this puppet and it's doing all the things I wanted to do, but this hair is not very dynamic for being a hair full of snakes. I thought I had more actually. I'm just going to, I cheated a little bit. Cheated, problem solved, either or. If I didn't create this little toupee here, you would see where all of the snakes connect because they're just a solid shape. I didn't group these guys either. Might make some kind of rotated down a little bit. But you could see that otherwise I'd have all these strokes here. I thought about merging everything with the Pathfinder, but then I wouldn't have the distinction between the bodies, and then when I tried dragging them around, they would be kind of stuck. So my solution was to duplicate the hair shape and take the stroke out, and I just made it a little bit smaller. I also want to finesse the snakes, like I said, so I wanted to do kind of a temporary fix here. And then I just saved that, and then my changes are going to update in here. Oh, so one thing happened here though. Because I added the snake to the head, it shifted the orientation of the nose over because the face outline's a little different. If I go to the rig mode, the only thing you could really do is change the position. So if I click on the nose and make sure just my regular selection tool is selected, I could move this over. Rather than moving everything over individually, a better solution here would probably just be selecting the face background and shifting that over. But because it's center aligning everything, because we added this thing that went past that original center point, it just shifted things a little. But changes we make in here too, of course, just update in the record mode. So I have my movement here, things are looking good. However, I want some more dynamic movement with these snakes. So what I can do is in the rig mode, I have that layer selected, so in this case it's my face background, and I actually already added 2 points. Let me delete those. So I'll actually show you in that first column how many draggers there are. So I don't have any pins or draggers added. They've got a couple of different names depending on the program. And I'm just going to click on that first handle tool. And then for this one, I just am going to work with this first snake here. So I want to be able to drag it. I don't need to click in the eye, it just seemed like a right place to click. If I don't have another handle here, it's not going to work the way I want it. I also need to assign a property. Because I use just this basic handle tool, it doesn't have a property applied, and it's not going to really do anything. When I go back into record, it's not dangling at all, and it's not letting me drag it. That's because I need to assign its property. So with that point selected, it's white, you can choose the physics, modifiers, or miscellaneous options over here. So these are all things that can be applied to a handle. Dangle and magnet are physics-based ones. You can also make it draggable or fixed, which is mostly what we're going to be using. A newer one is adding motion lines, so when we do walk cycles and things like that, if you want little motion lines to come off the feet of your character, you can. These points are crucial for doing things like walk cycles or having arms move. This is how you discern the points of the body that shift, in addition to having different layers like lower leg, upper leg, etc. But I can click on this one point, and then, and this one, no, there's also breathe and transform. Breathe, that Bongo puppet had, the gorilla, there was just a point in the center of his chest that was just expanding and contracting. We'll be adding all of these to different puppets coming up. I just want to make this first modifier draggable. And you can see when you do that, you actually get that mesh. It's looking over the content and seeing if there's any other points, and what it can do in relation to those. If I have just one draggable handle, and I go back into record mode, you can see it is draggable now, and that's great, but it also can disrupt the, oh, that's kind of cute getting that little distorted one, unintentional, but check that out. You can see it's distorting way more than I want it to. So in rig mode, I want to add a fixed handle at the base of the head here. So I could just choose that same tool. I will for this. I'm just going to click with my handle tool, and then I'm going to choose fixed for that one. So I've got the draggable handle, and then the fixed means it's you shall not pass. There's not going to be any modification past that fixed point for that area. So if I go back into rig mode and test that, you can see I have much better control just by having that fixed point. So I want to go in and add that to the other snakes. And rather than having to choose the modifier each time, be mindful of the modifiers. For whatever reason, you could make something fixed and draggable at the same time, which makes no sense because that cancels each other out. So you'd probably want to choose either or. And I choose fixed for this inner one because I don't want to drag that too. If I had that set to draggable, if I had two draggable points on the side of the head here, it would work, but you could see then it's starting to get that distortion again. But now I could go near the base of the head and move that too. Not what I want to do, but at least not for this puppet. So I want, just like with the cat puppet, I want to have fixed points. I can also just X out the property I don't want. I want to create fixed points all along the base of the skull. And so I could do that individually, or I could just choose the pin tool, which you could see the note adds a fixed handle to restrict warping. That's what we want. And so I'm just going to go around the base of the head, and you can see as I'm adding these points, it's adding more of a wire mesh, which is going to give us more control. I just have this little mesh icon turned on in the lower left corner. That might not be useful to you. Sometimes it is in After Effects or this program, just to see kind of where the breaks might happen. And then I want to have a draggable point all along the outside. Actually, let's do 1/2 is draggable and 1/2 is dangle, just to see the difference. So the draggable handle is just this little one that has kind of a compass icon on it. So I'm just going to click on each one of these. And then the dangle one is the one that's just at the very end here. So I'll just click for each one of these. Keep in mind I could also click with just that basic one and then set it to dangle. Now if I go back into the record mode, you can see the dangle ones on the left actually do have a nice little sway to them. And if I go to, I've got dragger properties here, that's more of what I'm doing with the ones that I'm using by hand. So you can see this one, because the snakes are part of the same layer, this snake is actually distorting the one below it. And that would be really hard to prevent unless they were individual layers. Then each layer has its own mesh and can't interrupt the other one. So like with anything in animation, at least digital animation, the more layers you have, the more control you have. But we do have these little draggable points now. I can choose whether the range is limited. So if I don't want it to get out of control, I could say, you know, keep it so many pixels away from where I'm dragging, so you can't like make an arm go off the screen. Most importantly, you could choose what it does after the move. So you could have it hold it in place, which you could see here. So if I drag one of these and then hold it in place, let me turn off the mid range. It's going to stay there, even though that looks not great. It's really distorted. If I click on that drop down and choose return to rest, it doesn't do it right away. You have to drag it again. It's kind of weird. But then it will kind of ease back into that position. So when we do this with like an arm later on, you can have it raise it up and automatically go back down or stay up in that position. Not really a right or wrong, it's really just what you want to animate. it's cool because if you do return to rest, you can choose how long after the duration does it do it. So all these parameters give you tons of control. So if I say I want it to be 15 seconds, I can move this, and when I let it go, it'll slowly return back to that original point. And if I wanted to animate this, anything that has the red record icon next to it is armed for recording. So when I record, those are the things that will be present. Now you can do multiple passes with the record, so you don't have to pay attention to your lip sync and your face and dragging these at the same time. Obviously you can only drag one at a time. So you could do multiple passes and you would just disarm the things that you don't want to record in that pass. I'll come back to that in 1 second because that's what I did for Cat Chad and his lip sync versus his head movement versus his blinks. Those were 3 different passes to get more accuracy. On the dangle side, that's going to be controlled by the physics dropdown. That's not currently armed for animation, so that wouldn't translate, but we could still see it and test it here. If I wanted it to record, I would just click on that little red icon. And then I can change the gravity strength. Looks like she needs to be like watered or something. I could change the gravity direction. Oh, they've all perked up there. And then I can change the wind strength. So, kind of fun when you have hair. I've never actually had a Medusa puppet before, but I could see a lot of potential here with the snake movement. I'm already getting a lot of ideas for later. When we do replays and stuff, I think I want to have like the tongues of the snakes come out and just kind of flick. That would be a cool frame-by-frame animation. But there's a lot of opportunities here for things that we can record. And the snakes are just cute. I do want to add more variation to them, and I would like them to be separate layers within the background just to really get customization. But under the physics, we've got those options. We've got some things set to dangle, so we can choose the squashiness and the stiffness of these. Snakes probably wouldn't have too much stiffness to them, but it's just fun to play with, even if you're not recording. And then we don't have any collision with this. We're not firing things like the Chicken Blaster template, which you can see just on the main home screen. Chicken Blaster is using the physics and collision detection within Character Animator, which was one of the newer features before body tracking came out. And then as far as things like sticks go, I'm going to come back to that, but real quick, Red Monster is like one of the first puppets, I'd say. And he just has like basic head movement and he's moving around. The only reason he's not floating everywhere is because he's fixed at the base. So if you didn't want a floating head, he does have a body background, but if you click on the puppet himself, you can see there's just a fixed point at the bottom, and that's what's keeping him from floating all over the place. So if we removed that and went back to record, he's just floating like the Breaking Chad puppet now. So that fixed point is actually what's securing it to that scene. If there's not one like that, it's just going to move all over. So in this exercise, that's what we want. That's what the template does. But if you're wondering why your puppet's just floating in space, it's because it does not have a fixed point to secure it to the background. This guy, if I made just the 1 point fixed, you could see it's like kind of just stapled in the middle there. That's what the stick is. The stick is the only dragger we didn't talk about. It's basically just a handle that has width to it. So the stick tool is just like a regular old handle. It's just that we could say this should be fixed, and then that's what's keeping it straight all along the bottom versus just that little point. If you look at Bongo's rig mode, Bongo has breathe applied to the center. So there's a point in the middle of the chest that's set to breathe. And then you can see over here that you can control that. I think I showed that before. But now that we've talked about handles, you can see he has these draggers for his limbs. And that's one of the main ways that you have moving limbs, is this combination of, if I go to his torso. So you can see he has draggable points in his hands. He has fixed points in his shoulders. And then these sticks are what's keeping it to look like bones, essentially. If I take the sticks out and go back to record, you'll see that this is all loosey-goosey, where this one has that structure to it. So dragging points can add a lot of stability overall. It kind of looks like he's hitchhiking or something. I always think he's like scratching his armpit, but you know, that's probably just me. With breaking Chad, I'm really just looking for you to use the Chad puppet, whether it's the Photoshop or Illustrator file, modifying it the best you can. You don't need to do any concept sketches or anything ahead of time. That's more your final. Really, it's just to experiment with Photoshop and Illustrator if it's been a while. Get used to that layer hierarchy within Character Animator, but then also play with the performance capture and lip sync. And it doesn't have to be a short scene or soliloquy or anything like that. It doesn't even have to be you speaking. It could be a clip from something else. But with recording, just a few things you want to keep in mind as you do it. One, we've talked mostly about the puppets, not so much the scenes in this class. When you click on the scene, the little clapboard icon, you get the icons to the far right where the properties are. And you can choose the frame rates. I feel like I should be pointing downwards because they're below me. You can choose the frame rates, the duration, and then the width and height of the canvas. So you can kind of change this accordingly based on what you need to create. Right now I've got a really sizable timeline here. So like if I want to make this more like 20 seconds, that's going to be that much faster to render and record. So like you don't need to have this expansive timeline and RAM preview that. You have some basic settings here. If you click on the little scene icon, we created the scene, of course, by clicking on that icon at the bottom of the project window. And then because you can have multiple puppets in a scene, you'd want to make sure that you have that puppet layer selected. So you can see it's highlighted here. If I was to bring in a different puppet like Cat Chad, you could have, he's like lurking behind Medusa. You can have multiple puppets in the scene, but only the one that's highlighted is going to be active. And as far as just moving them around, of course they're doing the capturing with the camera. If we didn't want them to respond to the camera at all, we could just turn off camera input. You could see it's still lip syncing. We could also turn off the lip sync entirely or just do the video recording. These are also things that we can turn off incrementally to just get the audio, just get the head movements, and really break up the performance to get the most accuracy possible. Also with recording, let me turn the lurking Cat Chad off here. Also with recording, you do have some basic things, like you can't edit the artwork in Character Animator. You can just do basic transformation stuff. Let me collapse some of these properties. But with transform, if you have the puppet selected, you can do things like just as simple as changing the position, X and Y. You can change the scale. You probably want to do scale ratio-wise and not individually, but you can do scale, position. You could rotate the puppet. You could change opacity. Ooh, and if you rotate, you could see that the dangle and physics are being affected too. Any one of these things you want to animate, there's a little stopwatch to the left of it that's just not evident until you hover your cursor over it. But just like in After Effects, the stopwatch means you're going to animate that thing. So if we wanted like a very dramatic entry here from like left to right for whatever reason, I can move the puppet right off the stage, make sure my playhead's at the beginning, click on my stopwatch for position, and then I wouldn't need to do performance capture for this. I would just animate this like I would in After Effects. I could just move the playhead forward to a different place in time and then just scrub that thing or that value that's marked for animation over. And then if I just scrub between those two keyframes, I could see that animation. If I hit the space bar, I could see it animate in. And we can make that a little bit faster just by bringing those keyframes closer together. And that's really dorky, but you get the idea. So you could do animation of any of these properties, and any of these things actually, anything that's not performance capture based will have the stopwatch next to it. So I mean, you could animate the physics changing over time, like I said, any one of these transformation properties, the lip sync. So keep that in mind. It's not all just camera based. That's just one of the things about this program that makes it really unique. For recording the camera performance, you just have to make sure, I'm going to delete the keyframes for now just so that she's always on camera. But if you have a puppet that's kind of sinking down low or anything, one thing I would check is the lighting. Having good lighting definitely helps. You could always reposition it in the X and Y to get it kind of centered or change the scale. And one thing I would do before recording is click Set Rest Pose. It's already doing a pretty good job of tracking my face, but if I click Set Rest Pose, it's going to add that tracking data to it, and you can see it's looking at my jaw, my mouth, my nose, my eyebrows, and then there's special tracking data just following my pupils. And before I record, I would just look at how it does with that and then kind of fine-tune things. So camera strength I had already brought down. If that's too high, you'll notice because your pupils go right out of your eye. Eyebrows are another thing that often needs a little bit of help. So if you twirl down your face options, your eyebrows can go right off your head. So it's good to minimize that. So just going and customizing the whole thing. Right now I don't have the audio picking up with the microphone, but if I do that, you can see we can adjust the mouth strength, the eyelid strength, just how sensitive or receptive the puppet is to what it's seeing. We can also have the eyebrows move separately, which is usually kind of a catastrophe. Let's turn that back on. So I'm going to record just both things right now and just show a general way of doing it. So I would have everything armed that I want to animate. Then on my timeline here, right above it, I would click record. This will be very short because I don't like performing on camera, imagine that. But if I click record, it will give me a little countdown. And I can move my head around and get that dangle going. And I'd probably say something of more importance than describing what it's doing, but that's okay. And you get to see the playhead moving along, and it's going to track whatever is armed. So eye gaze, face, lip sync, and then I would hit stop when I'm done. So you could see in the timeline all of the data it collected. And it's always fun to scrub through audio. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here with this lower right slider below the timeline. And you can see it recorded the audio itself. And then there's a different kind of category for each one of these things we have armed. So there's the eye gaze, there's the face, and the lip sync. And then it actually shows you which Viseme it's using. And this is awesome because if the lip sync didn't work, like here it's showing the S sound, I could actually right click on that and switch it to what it should be. So if it's playing back and it misheard something or it just looks wrong to you, you don't need to re-record that part. You can right click on one of these little Visemes, one of the little green chunks, for lack of a better term. It's showing you how long it's up there. But you can right click on it and choose any of the other Visemes, or you could just turn it off altogether, which is really nice, and make it just silent for that moment. And so we could play that back. I won't play back the whole thing, but... So if we want to go in and record just something separately, we can go in and edit things like the mouth shape like I showed. If we didn't like the eye gaze in particular, something like that, we could go back to the beginning and disarm everything else. So if I turn off the face recording, the dragger, the lip sync, the triggers, I just want the eye gaze to be different. So I'm even going to disarm the microphone. And so it's just going to be watching my eyes as it records, and then it's going to do a new take on top of this one. So nothing else is triggered for animation except for eye gaze. And so I'm going to click record. I don't need to do that whole thing, but you can see it created a new take right there for eye gaze, and that's all it recorded, was what my eyes were doing at that moment. It kept everything else, it blended the things together, I didn't have to do anything else. But this kind of multi-stage recording is another thing I really love about this program. I'm going to work on Medusa more in this next week and just add some more details and some other things I want to animate as examples. I'm uploading the Cat Chad puppet if you'd like to experiment with him as well. I did do an example with him where I actually computed some lip sync and then also did multiple takes with the recording. Oops, and you can see we still have that out of control dangle point there. So I'm going to go back in there and turn off that body layer for now. And then click on our puppet and add. We could fix that with just another fixed point. And then we won't be so out of control. You can also reset things. I know I was really playing with the settings here. You can reset any property by clicking on the little X next to it. It will show you what's been changed. So if I change the gravity strength, you could see things are a little less weird there. And if I just kind of remove those different properties, I still want them actually dragged down a little bit here. But this was something I already recorded, and now it's doing like this 3D head move thing that was not there before. But if I play this back, I'll keep it short, but...
Cat, I'm a kitty cat, and I dance, 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 and I dance, dance, dance. Cat, I'm a kitty cat, and I dance, 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 and I dance, dance, dance. Cat.
So yeah, you get the idea. So I did multiple takes with that, but then more importantly, I brought in audio of that awful song. I don't even remember what the source is other than the literal white cat flipping back and forth. But I have one that I haven't animated yet, so let me grab that. So I exported my cat file as a puppet file. This will be on Blackboard, and if you import this, the only difference between this and like the AI file is that it will already have the rigging. So with that puppet selected, I'm going to click on the new scene button. And now we have one that's free of whatever I did with the handles to make it all move around weird. So I could turn the microphone back on, and you can see this puppet in all of its fanged glory. So rather than me recording some kind of weird meowing song, I have a weird meowing song that you can import. And so I'm just going to use Transform to move this guy down a little bit. And I'm going to import my MP3. I typed in the word kitty and one of my cats appeared. It's pretty interesting. So I had imported this already pre this demo, so that's why there's two up there. But you can import audio files just like you can import artwork into Character Animator. In your scene, you would just drag that audio file into the timeline. And I wouldn't want it to record my voice at all because it's just translating from this file. So I'm just going to turn the microphone icon off. And then I could do head movements, but I'm actually going to do that in multiple takes. So first, I have my puppet in the scene. I have this MP3 in the scene. I could record my own voice like I just did with the Medusa. More times than not, you're probably going to use someone else's voice. At least that's what I do. And then I would just go to my timeline menu, and I would choose Compute Lip Sync from Scene Audio. And you can see it's computing. It shows you a progress bar. And so you could see it added all of the Visemes there and the lip sync itself. So if we go back and play that back.
Cat, I'm a kitty cat, and I dance, 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 and I dance, dance, dance. Cat, I'm a kitty cat, and I dance, 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 and I dance, dance, dance. Cat, I'm a kitty cat.
So I only continued playing that, not to torture you, but you could see the lip sync gets less and less accurate as more instruments come in, because Character Animator, at least not yet, can't differentiate the difference between somebody speaking and an instrument in the background. I just noticed that it's the 22nd at 2:22. I'm sorry. I had to just Am I seeing that right? I am. Oh, and here comes another cat. Oh god. Ideally, you want audio that's just the vocal track and not any background music. In the beta version of Character Animator, there is something to read from a transcript. It reads through the transcript or captions and associates that with the different visemes, which is even more accurate than the lip syncing. Or you could do a combination of lip syncing and transcripts, which is brand new. I haven't actually had a chance to use that yet. I just learned about it yesterday. So even just the regular version of this program is doing a lot of awesome stuff, but the betas just keeps advancing what this program can do. So hopefully we can see some of those changes sooner than later. So if I play that back, there's no head movement or anything like that because I wasn't recording the head movement. So if I went back to the beginning, clicked on my puppet, and then I don't want to record any audio, so that's turned off. I don't want to record any lip sync. I just want to record the eye gaze and the face. I'm just going to disarm everything else. And I'd go back to the beginning with the playhead, since that's where it's going to record once I click it. And I would just click the record button again.
Cat, I'm a kitty cat, and I dance, 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 and I dance, dance, dance. Cat, I'm a kitty cat, and I dance, 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 and I dance, dance, dance. Cat.
And that's enough of that too, but you can see where it's recorded, and I can go back and play that back, or re-edit it, or redo it.
Cat, I'm a kitty cat, and I dance, 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 and I dance, dance, dance. Cat, I'm a kitty cat, and I dance, 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 and I dance, dance, dance. Cat.
Adorable. He looks a little too caffeinated for me, so I want to do one more take that's me just triggering blinks. I don't want to stare into the camera and try to get it to pick it up. Even when I do it now, it's not picking it up at all. So I'm just going to go in and do like a trigger pass. So I'm going to disarm everything except for triggers. And this is such a cool thing about this program, that you can do a layered performance and really build it up. And if you have multiple puppets, you would just click on that one and you could do the same thing. It's only going to record to the puppet that's selected. So I've got my Cat Chad puppet selected. I just have the triggers armed, which is what I have for the blink. And so one last pass here, I'm just going to record. I'm just going to click B whenever I want it to blink.
Cat, I'm a kitty cat, and I dance, 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 and I dance, dance, dance. Cat, I'm a kitty cat, and I dance, 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 and I dance, dance, dance. Cat, I'm a kitty cat, and I dance, 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 and I dance.
I let it go for too far, but that's okay. I want to trim this down a little bit. I know I shrunk down the scene, but you have this work area that's not really clearly marked right at the very top. It's really just, if you just kind of drag where it says frames, you get this little gray bar that comes out. I want to trim the whole thing down at like 5 seconds. So I could just drag out that little work area there. And then under timeline, I have a couple of different options here, but I could say trim scene to work area. So this is exactly what I do in After Effects too. I could go into the composition settings and change them there, just like I could click on the scene and change it. I'm usually using my work area to choose what I'm RAM previewing and working on. Same thing here, I drag that little work area out, find the portion I want, and then I could just go timeline, trim scene to work area. And now it's much more manageable in just that little bit. So I could go in and edit this more, but just for now, I'm going to show you how to export this, because we'll be talking about performances and things we can do throughout the semester. So once you record it and you want to share it elsewhere, obviously you could do a live stream, which is what we do in the very last few weeks of the semester. I usually bring this CH project file directly into After Effects and work with it there. Then the changes I make in Photoshop or Illustrator will affect the puppet file, and then that non-rendered puppet file will update in After Effects. And After Effects is where I render everything, because I could stitch together scenes and things like that and add effects if I want to, like atmospheric ones or 3D and things like that. So for exporting, there's a few different options, but the most basic one is just File, Export, and then using the media encoder. The media encoder is going to give you, it's going to open up the media encoder. I'm going to just save this to my desktop, it saves it as an H.264 file. And I'm just going to click Save. That will launch the media encoder. And then I could change my settings and stuff in here if I'd like to. I could change the file name, but then I would just choose to render that file. And then that rendered file I'd upload to YouTube or Vimeo, etc. And then that's how I would turn it in. So I prefer if you upload it to a service like YouTube and share the link rather than posting the video itself, just because that can get pretty large file size wise. But you can see I've got my MP4 file right here. And if I double click to open it, there's my
cat. I'm a kitty cat. And I dance, 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 and I dance, dance, dance. Cat.
finished file. And you don't need to add a background or anything like that. However, if you wanted to, Character Animator really only works with the scenes and the puppets. The scenes themselves are just the timeline. They don't really hold any other information. You'd have to import a file just as a puppet, even though it's your background, which is really weird. You could add a background to the puppet's face or something itself, but you really don't want that to move around or anything either. So if I know I've got some space images on my computer, so I'm just going to look up the word space. And not quite what I was looking for, but that's okay. I'm going to put Saturn behind him because I can. And it's going to import it as a puppet because it only knows puppets or scenes. And then in record, I would just drag this down like I would a puppet. So I would just drag the Saturn down into, and it's behind him, you just can't really see it. So within transform, I would increase the scale. And I keep doing scale X, I would probably just do scale for X and Y. But now you can see that there's a background behind him if you wanted a floating head in space or some other location. And a question earlier was about swapping a background with like a trigger. I would have to create an Illustrator or Photoshop file with multiple layers, but if I imported a PSD or AI file with multiple layers, like background 1, 2, or 3, I would be able to switch between them by assigning a trigger, by like turning something on and off. So like in this case, I'm just going to add a trigger by clicking below this little column. And I'm just going to do S for Saturn. I don't think I have a smile applied to this guy, which is usually what I use S for. But if I hold down S now, I can get that background to come up. And then if I had a different trigger, I could have it launch a different layer. I say as I have a cat on my keyboard. So there's a whole triggers column here. It's really just whether a trigger is on or off. But you could do things like that if you just kind of think outside of puppet versus scene. Like it's technically viewing this as a puppet, but it doesn't have any moving parts or anything like that. So we'll be going into compositing obviously later in the semester. Your final is not only to design and create an original puppet, but also to composite them into a scene, which is probably something you'll do outside of Character Animator. But there's no shortage of things you can do in this program. And I know I've said it so many times, but I can't recommend just experimenting enough. Experimenting is a great way to learn in any program. It's helpful when it's non-destructive like Photoshop, but I definitely recommend just playing, especially with this project. This is supposed to be just getting used to the software and the workflow. That's really all I'm looking for. And then just doing a little recording. It doesn't have to be Shakespeare or anything like that. Just trying the performance feature or using the lip sync or animating through the dragger. We've got multiple lectures just about the handles themselves coming up. So mostly just edit that puppet, make it your own, and then upload it to the message board by next week. That's really your only project at this moment. But if you want to think ahead to custom puppets and things you might want to animate, that's always a great idea too. After this project, we're actually going to be doing a walk cycle exercise. So I'll be building on to working with full bodies and moving across the scene and replays. But it all starts with a floating head, just like so many other art forms. So please let me know if you have questions, but that is it for today.